Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today here on Point of View. It is our weekend edition, an opportunity for you to hear from a number of guests around our roundtable today. And in the tradition of Sesame Street, this particular program is brought to you by the letter I. We're going to be talking about immigration, going to be talking about Israel and ISIS in Iraq, and Penna last time talked about imperial president. And if that's not enough, maybe a little bit later we'll maybe buy a vowel, maybe E. That can stand for Ebola, and maybe the economy, and even executive orders. So lots to talk about today. Penna Dexter, I don't know, but August is always supposed to be a slow time. We have more things to cover today than ever before.
We do. In fact, I sat in for you one day this week, Kerby, and literally for the final hour of the show, every segment I had a different guest, and it moved very fast. We had so many subjects. And you forgot one I don't think we're going to talk about today, but last time we talked about the IRS, and that's always a good subject to talk about on Fridays. I do want to introduce one of our roundtable co-hosts today. He's one who's been here a couple of other Fridays. Mike Berry, Michael Berry, Esquire, is Senior Counsel and Director of Military Affairs for Liberty Institute. He works there with Kelly Shackelford and a lot of other great attorneys. The exciting thing about Mike is that for 7 years, he was actually an attorney with the U.S. Marine Corps. And that made it very exciting as Liberty Institute was putting this military pillar in place as he was coming on board. He also went to Afghanistan in a high-profile combat deployment, and he was also, this is another interesting part of his bio, and I won't go into all of it, but he actually went to law school at Ohio State. And he has a great story. I don't know if we'll be able to tell it today about what happened with the Christian Legal Society there. He was on the cutting edge of a religious liberty battle, even back then in law school. So that's Mike Berry. Hi, Mike. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah. It's great to be back again. I always have a fantastic time when I'm here with you guys, and so it's just a privilege to be back again.
Well, and certainly I've had a chance to hear you before when I've been out traveling, and Penna has been the host, and I've just been very impressed with the level of expertise you brought to that. And we have a number of listeners in Ohio, so all the Buckeyes are listening in today as we're talking about that. Let me introduce our other guest who's been with us once before, and he is our Texas State Representative, Matt Krause. He's been on the program with us and certainly brings a lot to the table. And as I said off air, so I might as well say on air, those of us that love basketball, those of us who played basketball in high school always dreamed of playing college basketball. This man indeed did, and was not only a star on that team, but then graduated, went to Liberty University Law School. I think you were in that inaugural class there. That's with right. Matt Staver, then later joined and worked with Liberty Counsel. And so today also not only serves as Texas State Representative, but also the president of the Northwest Tarrant Republican group, and also works with the Patriot Academy. So we've just got a lot of things to talk about with you today, don't we?
Yeah, and thanks again for having me. As Michael said, it's always an honor to be on here, and looking forward to the discussion. I'm
thinking a Texas State Representative's got something to say about immigration, so we're going to certainly get into that. But we're going to do, as we do, Penna, so often, talking about this issue of religious liberty. We have one individual that is with Liberty Institute, another who used to be with Liberty Counsel. And so let's go to Michael first. Any comments that you might want to get from him?
Well, yes, because I saw in the news, I saw a press release out from Liberty Institute this week about the infamous Kuntz cheerleader case. We've talked about this on Point of View. I think it's been going on for a couple of years now. And so Liberty Institute has now gone back into court with regard to this. Can you explain to our listeners what's going on now?
Yeah, this case is, gone on for a couple of years now, as you mentioned, and it started off with a group of cheerleaders who wanted to, instead of the typical messages that you see on these football banners that the football players run through in the fall here in Texas, normally it would say something like "Crush the Cougars" or "Slay the Tigers" or something like that. Well, these cheerleaders decided they wanted to do something a little more encouraging and uplifting, and they began writing Bible verses on the run-throughs. Well, lo and behold, somebody complained, and the school district said to the cheerleaders, you can't do that anymore. We're going to censor that speech. And even though the cheerleaders were the ones that came up with the slogans, they were the ones that provided the material. So really this was of their own choosing and doing. And their argument was this was our speech as private citizens. This is not the government speaking. This is not the school district speaking. And the school said, no, we still have the right to censor your speech, and we're not going to let you do that. Well, Liberty Institute got involved. We filed a lawsuit in that case, and we actually prevailed initially. The court agreed with us that the cheerleaders have the constitutional right to write these Bible verses on these run-through banners. Well, and we thought, well, great. Everybody should be happy now. The school district doesn't have to worry about somehow this could be construed as government speech because a judge has said, no, it's private cheerleader speech. It's constitutionally protected. Nevertheless, school district appeals that decision. So it goes to the Court of Appeals, and the Court of Appeals does something really funny. They said, well, we think that in this case, they said it was moot because the school district basically gave the cheerleaders the permission to put the verses on the banners, but the school district also said, but we retain the right to exercise control over those messages at any point in the future. And so the Court of Appeals said, well, then the issue's moot because they got to put the messages on there and never got punished for it or anything like that. Well, that really leaves these cheerleaders, and anybody else for that matter in the school district, in this kind of twilight zone where basically the school district is saying, you get to have these verses, but only because we give you permission to do so. At any time, we could tell you, nope, no more.
Well, Liberty Institute takes cases so they can make a difference. So you all can make a difference in the body of law, in the interpretation of the Constitution. And so I applaud you because you're continuing on with this fight, because really just leaving it as a cosmetic fix. Yes, the girls can use the banners, use scripture adorned banners, but they really don't have the right to do it. We're just giving them the privilege to do it. Wouldn't really be a final victory, would it?
Absolutely. And certainly, many attorneys would say, well, wait a minute, what are you complaining about, Liberty Institute? The court, the school district even said, yeah, we're not going to do anything about the fact that they put religious messages on those banners. Okay, but that doesn't do any good. It doesn't do anybody in the future, or anybody else for that matter, any good, because at any time the school district could come back and say, well, now we're not going to allow any future religious messages to be put on these banners. We're not going to allow anybody to put scripture verses on banners. And so we've really not done anybody else any good, even though, sure, in this one instance, we have helped our client, which is absolutely what we always strive to do first and foremost. But we also want to make sure that we are establishing a rule of law, a precedent that follows our Constitution and follows our state and our federal laws that clearly give cheerleaders the right to do this if it's done so in the manner that they did it here.
We're going to take a break, and when we come back, talk a little bit more about some other religious liberty cases. But I always get a kick out of this because the atheists that have protested this have said, well, these religious banners do not belong at a Texas high school football game because a Texas high school football game is not a religious event. They've never been to a Texas high school football game, I might say. That is something a little different in the state of Texas. So when we come back, we're going to spend some time not only talking about some of the rights of students on a high school campus, but Representative Matt Krause has actually put together legislation to protect the rights of college students as well. And then we're going to get into some of the issues in the news today. Already we are dropping bombs in Iraq. And what does that mean? We'll spend some time talking about that. Certainly immigration is another one of those issues, and a whole host of topics we will try to cover in 2 hours. We'll do our best, and we'll continue with Weekend Edition right after these important messages.
The Point of View Commentary with Kerby Anderson.
A British author writing in The Banner of Truth began with this hypothetical scenario. An elder preceded the minister to the pulpit, then came to the front and addressed the congregation. Last week, a child was bored in the service. A gasp went through the congregation. Men looked at their feet. Women cried quietly, and children went white. He then suggests in this hypothetical scenario that the church officers were going to meet with the pastor and resolve the problem. I found it interesting that the author thought that it was a significant problem in British churches. It is certainly a problem in American churches. One of the greatest sins a church can commit today is to bore children. Church services and youth programs are designed to be high energy and to keep the attention of not just children, but adults. It is understandable why pastors work so hard to make sure that their services and youth programs are boredom-free zones. Churches have to compete with a generation raised on television, video games, computers, and smartphones. They live in a world of noise and excitement. They have short attention spans. What a contrast to adults who lived in the pre-digital age. They read books. They played games they made up themselves. They pursued various activities and hobbies. They didn't expect their parents or pastors to entertain them. I wonder if we wouldn't do these children a favor by once again introducing them to a simpler life. Instead of youth programs playing loud music and showing videos, why not provide quiet reflection and solid biblical instruction? If we really wanted to prepare children for the future, we better prepare them for sometimes being bored. When they get a job, they must be prepared to do some boring tasks. Future fathers and mothers certainly should be prepared to do lots of boring, repetitive chores. Life isn't always fun and exciting. If children or adults are bored in church, the problem may not be with the worship or the sermon. There is value in learning to be still and to hear from God. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, it's Weekend Edition. If you'd like to join our conversation a little bit later, we'll open up the phones, 1-800-351-1212. Penna Dexter with me today, and we have two lawyers and very smart individuals indeed, Michael Berry and Matt Krause. And I might mention that as we were talking with Michael Berry, the first article there, Legal Rights for High School Cheerleaders, and it's a link to Liberty Institute. Of course, you can also go to our web links there. And Michael, there are some very important things people can do if they want to support you in this case or many of the other cases, right?
That's right. And as you mentioned, they can log on to our website at libertyinstitute.org and find out more about what's happening with the Counsel cheerleaders case and seeing just the type of people who are coming to their support, such as both of our Texas U.S. senators have voiced support for them, as has the Texas Attorney General. So if folks like that are coming out to support the Counsel cheerleaders, then certainly this is a cause worth supporting, and Liberty Institute's really honored to be able to be a part of that.
I can think of another big reason why it's important to go forward on this, and that's because when this case broke 2 years ago, this was a Facebook phenomenon. There were cheerleaders all over the country that were excited about what was happening and that these cheerleaders were standing up and fighting. And so just to get the local approval of that school district doesn't do those kids across the country any good.
Yes, very good.
Yeah, one of the neat things that came out of that was one of the cheerleaders mentioned that, Counsel only has a population of a few thousand people, but that as a result of this issue and this case going to national prominence, that the Counsel cheerleaders Facebook page has tens of thousands of likes now. So it's really brought them a much broader audience than they ever would have had otherwise.
So again, I want to move to another case, which I know Michael's going to have some comments about. But first of all, we go to Representative Matt Krause, and you have actually introduced an amendment to protect the rights of Christian students on college campuses. Now, it seems to me that when you go to college, it's an open forum, so you shouldn't have this problem. I can understand why there might be the need to control some of the messages in high school, but college, that should not be the case. But back to an illustration we used just a minute ago, because Michael's familiar with what happened with things like Christian Legal Society. You were concerned about what happens with some of these religious groups on college campuses. Please explain.
Yeah, that's exactly right. We've been seeing all across the country that these universities have started to implement these all-comer policies, which basically says no matter what student group you're in, whoever you are can come into the group and be even in leadership in the group. You can't dismiss anybody or keep anybody out, which seems so antithetical to the notion of freedom of association.
Right.
You know, the clubs come together for a specific purpose, and if somebody comes in to purposefully undermine or work against that purpose, why are they there in the first place? And so we don't feel it's right for you to be able to come in and then be forced into acceptance when all you're seeking to do is undermine the credibility and the mission of that group in the first place.
You know, and I think we would understand that if you had a vegan club, for example, and somebody who believes in meat, they certainly don't belong there. And of course, if you can see that, you can see why sometimes you'll have homosexual activists try to join Campus Crusade for Christ, now called CRU, or the Baptist Student Union or something like that, not with the goal of really trying to agree with and support the mission of that organization, but really, in a sense, to try to undermine it.
Right, exactly. And everybody says, well, college is a time for free expression. You should tolerate all viewpoints. And you're right, the university, the college is there for freedom of expression. But within that, there's little subsets of people who have ideas or certain beliefs, and they want to get together to advocate a certain viewpoint to the greater college body. And when you allow individuals who seek to undermine that in there, you dilute the message and dilute the effectiveness of that club.
And it seems to me what I'm seeing on college campuses today is saying, and I'm thinking of one at UC Berkeley, for example, at Bolt Law School, and many of the others that the Alliance Defending Freedom have dealt with in the past, saying, well, if you have a Christian legal society, even people that aren't Christian should be in not only the Christian Legal Society group, but even in leadership in the Christian Legal Society. And that makes no sense at all.
Right. It makes absolutely no sense. And I'm okay with, you know, every club should be open to anybody if you want to come and listen into what they have to say and hear their viewpoint or why they do what they do. But if you really don't like what a group is saying, the answer is to start your own group to battle against that in the marketplace of ideas and say, no, this is why y'all are wrong, and let the student body determine which one is more popular or which one's more effective. It's not to try to silence the other group and not let them talk and discuss the issues on their terms.
So what would your amendment actually do?
Our amendment said that no Texas university that receives public funding could implement an all-comer policy. So we're seeing that happen in California. We saw it happen in Vanderbilt in Tennessee. We're seeing it happen all across the country where these universities are doing it. So we're trying to head it off and preempt, kind of a preemptive strike to say, you know, you cannot put these policies in place because they go against the First Amendment, freedom of speech, freedom of association.
Matt, there was a Supreme Court case about this, and so in a sense, and we basically lost on that, but in a sense, is this heading that kind of a legal challenge off? Because if we don't have an all-comer policy in our schools, then we are not subject to that court decision?
Yeah, and it was a little nuanced. That was Christian Legal Society versus Martinez, that the California Law School Berkeley case. And the Supreme Court said it's constitutional to have all-comer policies if the university wants it. They didn't say it's unconstitutional not to have them. And so we read that and saying, since it's not unconstitutional not to have them, let's ensure that Texas colleges and universities that receive our funding are not implementing these policies which impede First Amendment rights.
Michael, I want to come to you because we were talking about OSU and Ohio State. You went through some of that in the law school. Explain the story.
Well, yeah, the university, Ohio State University, has a non-discrimination policy, or had one at the time at least. This was quite a few years ago now, unfortunately. And this non-discrimination policy did not allow for religious organizations such as Christian Legal Society to get an exemption or to be accepted out of that policy. And we had an organization that did not agree with our biblical views and beliefs that said, you're in violation of the university's non-discrimination policy. And so they filed a complaint with the university, and the university threatened to take away our funding, told us we could no longer meet on campus, we couldn't have access to student access fees or anything like that. And so we had to fight for our right to simply exist. And one of the things we've done at Liberty Institute is to identify the legal potential legal liability that many of these student organizations, these college student organizations, potentially face simply by trying to exist in accordance with their religious beliefs. If they happen to be a religious organization, and we've even identified here in Texas quite a few public universities that have these all-comers policies that Matt's talking about. And here's the amazing thing is that the universities will grant exceptions to those policies for fraternities and sororities to discriminate on the basis of gender, because they say, well, we don't want males trying to get into the sororities and we don't want females trying to get into the fraternities, so we understand we're going to allow you guys to not have to follow the all-comers policy on the basis of gender, but they won't apply the same exception and the same treatment to religious organizations. So they are in fact engaging in religious discrimination by doing so against organizations that want to adhere and conform to their sincerely held religious beliefs.
Matt, that's why you came up with this amendment. And first of all, I wanted to talk about this in terms of what you were trying to do, but also I know we have listeners in 43 different states. That means there are 42 other state legislators that could be in one way or another benefiting from some of the things that you've been trying to do in the state of Texas. And you'd be available, because we do have a link there so that people can find you if they want to say, well, I'd like to see if we could try to pass something like that in our state.
Yeah, I would encourage anybody who thinks that's a good idea for their state legislature. My email is just matt@mattkrause.org. Email me. I will get them the bill language. I will let them know. I will talk with them. As Michael said, we've got great information now from states like Florida, Texas, and other places that are seeing this happen on an everyday basis, and we want to head that off before it gets there and before First Amendment rights are infringed.
If you go to our website, pointofview.net, you'll see that the first web link is to Liberty Institute, and that's a way in which you can contact Michael. Also, we have a link to him under Today on Point of View. The second one is to Matt Krause, so they can find you there as well. The third one is for Patriot Academy. Just before we take a break, I wanted you to give a commercial for that, because we have had Rick Green with us before talking about this, David Barton talking about this, but you've been a speaker for the Patriot Academy, and it's not just a Texas event anymore. Now it's been going all across the country. So talk about what the Patriot Academy is.
That's right. And right now, as we speak, there's a Patriot Academy happening in Delaware for the first time this year. So we're in Arizona, Idaho, Delaware. Next year we'll be in Florida and possibly Ohio as well. But we're seeking to train the next generation of leaders. So we take 16 to 25-year-olds to the state capital, whatever state we're in, and we not only teach them how to be a legislator like a Boys State, but we give them a Christian philosophical foundation to not only be able to do the job, but do it well and from the right basis. So if anybody's interested or has 16 to 25-year-olds who are interested, I encourage you to look at patriotacademy.com, because we'll be doing this again next summer, and I think they would really enjoy it.
As I've said before, if you want to train your kids before they go off to college, Summit Ministries, Probes Mind Games Conference, if you want to train the future legislators, the Patriot Academy is the way to do that.
That's right.
And I've heard you say before that you walk up and down the corridors of the state capitol there in Austin, you run into some of your graduates from time to time.
That's right. And not only that, they're running presidential super PACs now. They've been chief of staffs to some high-ranking state officials. So, again, we not only want to prepare them to be a legislator, but any capacity that God calls them in, they can be a leader and effectively communicate Christian values and ideals.
Well, again, if you know somebody that's a future Matt Krause or Ken Paxton or whoever you might begin thinking about, this is another way in which you can connect up. We've been talking about religious liberty. We're going to change topics. We'll go to some of those I words, and we have some things happening right now in Iraq. 2 bombs already dropped in Iraq, and that is going to be the topic next. And then a little bit later, we'll get into some of those other I words, all of it coming to you today. And if you'd like to read more about any of the issues we're talking about or find those web links, it's all available at pointofview.net. Let's take a break. We'll continue our weekend edition conversation right after this.
You are listening to Point of View. For materials offered during the program, please write to Point of View, Post Office Box 30. That's Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, zip 75221. Or call our toll-free number, 1-800-347-5151. That's 1-800-347-5151. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Weekend edition today. If you'd like to join our conversation at any point, 1-800-351-1212. Penna Dexter with me, as she always is, but also joining us around the roundtable today, Michael Berry, Matt Krause, and they bring a lot of expertise to this issue. We're going to focus a little time and attention now on the Middle East, going first to Iraq. And this is a source of some concern. The president last night spoke about the concern that he had about tens of thousands of Yazidis who are actually part of an ancient faith known as Zoroastrianism. They're stranded in the mountainous area. Children are dying, actually, of either starvation or lack of water, and if they come down off the mountain, they'll be killed or probably the women brought into slavery. So the president has decided to take action. He talked about it last night. Of course, since then, there have been a couple of bombs that have been dropped. Gary Bauer, a good friend here, said just hours ago the Pentagon announced that the United States, the greatest military power in the world, even after 6.5 years of this president, has just dropped 2 500-pound bombs on ISIS positions. Well, that should take care of that. The golf course calls, where is the next fundraiser? Of course, he's being a little bit facetious, but the issue is, all right, are we going to be engaged in an airstrike? How far will we go? And, of course, what does this bode for the future of Iraq, and especially the continued advance of ISIS? Penna, your thoughts?
ISIS has been advancing, and we've talked really for the last week. We've had guests on the program and talked about the fleeing of the Christians from the city of Mosul, which used to be somewhat of a place where Christians would actually flee to. But now there aren't any left in that city. And so now we have these other, and so, but, we're being fair here. We're also focusing on this other religious minority that are stranded and starving and also thirsty. And we have dropped off some food and water, but not nearly enough from what I understand. Now we've dropped the bombs. And, I don't know what the military answer is. I know that we made a disastrous decision. Whatever you think about going into Iraq in the first place, the way we left in 2011 has been part of the reason all this is happening now. And so I think the United States bears some responsibility. It's going to be up to the military experts to decide what that is. But it does seem that as though our president is somewhat aloof and disengaged, and finally now perhaps engaging in this. But this is a serious situation, because what could happen is if they begin to take over all of Iraq and go into other countries in the Middle East, Syria and Jordan, we could really begin to see them realize their goal of getting control and sort of reinstituting an Islamic caliphate in the region. And this becomes a huge national security issue, and the U.S. will have to get involved then.
Let's talk about that for just a minute. People want to know what ISIS stands for, and that's the Islamic State, ultimately, of Syria and Iraq. Or sometimes, last night, the president talked about Levant. People say, what is that? Well, that's the old caliphate, which is that Middle Eastern idea. So even in the name, you have this idea of wanting to reestablish a caliphate. Now, a lot of people say, well, what's that? Well, back when the Ottoman Empire ruled that area, you had kind of a supranational government of implementing Sharia law in all of these regions. ISIS wants to do that very thing. In some respects, they want to do what the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt wanted to do, although the Muslim Brotherhood was quite willing to work through political means to get power. ISIS is really an offshoot of Al-Qaeda. Matter of fact, there were people in Al-Qaeda that thought ISIS was too radical.
Right.
You know you're in trouble when that's the case. And so there is a goal here to really take over not just Iraq and Syria, but this whole Middle Eastern region. And they are Sunni Muslims, and even as they take over a region, they are willing to kill not only Jews and Christians, but other Muslims, Shiite Muslims, for example. And there are all sorts of pictures we're seeing now of them pulling truck drivers off and finding out they're Shiite and killing them right there on the spot. So we are talking about a very radical group. Love to get any comments from our well, first of all, we'll get a military expert. He'll get some comments. But, Matt, you've been saying yes a couple of times. So what are your thoughts about this?
Well, I think what Penna said was absolutely correct, that this is the fruit of what we did in 2011. I think we pulled out a little too prematurely. We didn't even have that status of forces agreement in effect. It didn't seem like the Obama administration tried hard to get one of those in place before they drew out. And everybody said when you telegraph when you're going to leave, that just gives people the time to do it. I also think it was a mistake for the president to call ISIS a JV squad a couple of months back, because they've now become the largest, most effective, well-organized, well-funded terrorist network in the world. And so we're no longer dealing with some offshoot. This is a very sophisticated organization, and unless we take more drastic measures, I'm afraid to see what's going to happen in that area of the country, of the world.
I might just mention the funding comes from the fact that when they took over oil fields, they used those resources. Every time they stop a truck, they loot it. as people leaving, they take off everything. As a matter of fact, even the rings off of the women's fingers, if they can't get them off, they cut off their fingers to get their wedding rings. So this is a brutal group, and it is apparently fairly well funded. And when you have, as you mentioned a minute ago, Penna, the United States military leaving with very little of the force left. And let's recognize we still have troops in South Korea. We still have troops in Germany. So to say that we've got to pull out of Iraq the way we did, I think possibly is the reason for the problem that we have right now.
Well, it was President Obama's campaign promise and one of the things that he ran on, and so he apparently had to fulfill it. And, by the way, as far as their things that they've accumulated, they've been looting banks also, so
Yes.
they've been really getting a lot of money. And U.S. military equipment. They now have armored Humvees and things that were in Iraq. They've got those. So, they're becoming a huge military force and sort of an army, but they don't act like an army in some cases in the way that they operate.
I'd love to get some comments from a former Marine. Any comments that you might have, Michael?
Well, my two thoughts are, number one, setting aside the political military aspects of this, your heart has to be broken just for the humanitarian crisis that is developing before our eyes, and the plight of these women and children in many cases that are stranded and that are being persecuted because they are a minority, either ethnically or religiously. And then number two, the United States and the people here in the United States need to be very concerned, because the region of Iraq where these refugees, if you will, have been fleeing to is the northern portion of Iraq, in the Kurdistan area. Well, Kurdistan has traditionally and historically sought independence from the rest of Iraq, but it also shares a very important border with the nation of Turkey. Well, yes. Turkey is a strategic U.S. ally, and so if Turkey begins to experience some turmoil, some destabilization along its borders, then the U.S. is going to have to become very, very concerned with what's going on in that region, even more so than we are right now. And I guess my final comment is perhaps we haven't shown enough concern, which is to echo some of the comments we've heard, so far. We haven't shown enough concern up till now. The reference to ISIS as a JV squad was probably a poor choice of words and ill-timed, but now we're seeing them show their teeth.
Yeah, certainly. And Turkey, we might mention, NATO ally. So, again, we have to be paying attention to that. Before we take a break, though, Penn, I want to come back to a comment that you made just about the fact that we have had Christians pushed out of Mosul. But also the world opinion, because right now the United Nations is meeting to provide all sorts of condemnation to Israel about what is happening there, but almost a blind eye to the abuses of Hamas. Let's move from Israel now to Iraq for just a minute. These abuses have been taking place for some time, and to focus so much time and attention, and even the focus of the delegates on what's happening in Israel, when this is happening in Iraq, doesn't that strike you as a little bit odd, to put it mildly?
Well, they ought to be able to focus on both problems at the same time, but always Israel is the enemy, and always Israel is the bad guy in the eyes of the international community. It was so interesting last week, and we had Paul Diamond in here from attorney for the United Kingdom, and the first thing he said was, I'm glad I'm here in the U.S. because of the extreme anti-Semitism that's across Europe, and especially in Great Britain. And, I hadn't even thought about that, but really in Europe, it's still very anti-Semitic. And so, Israel is really, really a pariah and an enemy in the eyes of so many people. And it's just so interesting because people are not getting the real truth about what's going on there.
Well, and that's one of the reasons why we try to cover some of that. So when we come back, we'll talk about Israel. We'll talk about what's happening there. And we've had Representative Frank Wolf on this program, who I think has still been the most vocal and really one of the most articulate individuals to address what has been happening, not only to Christians, but other ethnic minorities, and was the first to really call for us to pay more attention to what was happening in Mosul, what in the past has happened to the Coptic Christians in Egypt. There are certainly so many Christians that have been persecuted persecuted, more killed in the last century than all the centuries preceding that, and certainly that is where we should be paying some attention as well. So even if the mainstream media doesn't cover this, we will cover it, and we'll also give you a chance to join our conversation today. We've put a few things on the table, and if you'd like to join us, that number is 1-800-351-1212. Roundtable today, Penna Dexter, Michael Berry, Matt Krause, and we'd love to get your comments. And if you'd like to read a little bit more about each one of the topics we are addressing today, go to our website, pointofview.net. We have articles on every one of these issues. We have web links to our guests, and we encourage you to go there and find a little bit more information. We'll be back, and we'll take some of your phone calls right after this.
In the wake of the 1973 Roe v. Wade Supreme Court decision, the pro-abortion movement launched a brilliant PR strategy, complete with an official description, pro-choice. Now, apparently, the term pro-choice has run its course. Planned Parenthood officials say they'd prefer the words women's health or economic security to describe the organization's mission. This coming from a group that derives more than half of its clinic income from abortions. Why the change? Cecile Richards, Planned Parenthood's president, told the New York Times, "I just think the pro-choice language doesn't really resonate particularly with a lot of young women voters." She's right. Surveys show young women are increasingly pro-life. We can now see into the womb, and guess what? That's a real baby in there that will die if the mother chooses abortion. Better, says Planned Parenthood, to talk about choosing health. But abortion isn't healthy. It's always lethal for the baby and can be dangerous to the mother. That's why so many states are passing laws requiring that abortion providers have admitting privileges at a local hospital in case of complications, which happen all the time during and after abortions. Texas passed such a law about a year ago, and the number of abortion clinics has dropped precipitously. Planned Parenthood, of course, always challenges these laws in court. Recently, a panel for the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals ruled that these regulations are perfectly constitutional in Texas. Mississippi falls under the same jurisdiction, yet the Fifth Circuit more recently struck down Mississippi's law, which regulates clinics just the way Texas's law does. The reasoning? The law would result in the closing of the last remaining abortion clinic in Mississippi. Mississippi would be the first abortion-free state in the nation, and that's somehow unconstitutional. The panel said it imposes a burden on a woman seeking abortion not to have an abortion clinic in her state. Yet 60% of Mississippi women obtaining abortions travel to another state for the procedure. If this decision stands, substandard clinics could be left open. Michael New pointed out in his recent National Review article on this decision that the owner of Mississippi's lone abortion clinic, Diane Durzis, was also the owner of the all-woman, New Woman abortion clinic in Birmingham, Alabama. That clinic was deemed unsafe and the state shut it down. Dr. New concluded it would be unfortunate if Mississippi's Department of Health would be unable to completely enforce various health and safety rules because of this ruling. The abortion rights crowd wants to be thought of as protecting women's health, but it's fighting laws that do just that. The decision by the fairly conservative Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals panel could result in a brand new right to have a functioning abortion clinic in your state. At a time when the public is becoming more pro-life, we should not be creating more rights to kill. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Weekend edition, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Penna Dexter, Michael Berry, Matt Krause. We're going to be talking about Israel. I see one of our callers wants to do that, so I'll use that call to kind of set up our discussion. We'll go first to the state of Texas, KBJS. Patricia, thank you for joining us today.
Hello.
You're on the air. What would you like to share with everybody?
Well, I've been around a long time. I remember the way Germany and Hitler began their persecution of the Jewish, what they call the Jewish question. And that was to make the Jewish people look as if they were the bad guys. And so the solution was round them all up and kill them. Of course, they didn't put it that specifically. Most of it was we we were kept in the dark for a long period of time. We had no idea that this persecution was going on in Europe a long time before we got involved in, just having opinions about it.
Mm-hmm.
The United States has a very high Jewish population, but the whole world should have been concerned, and we were pretty much kept in the dark.
So you see this relating to Israel then?
Absolutely. This was very much the way Hitler began his persecution of the Jews in Europe.
Sure. Penna, you'd mentioned Paul Diamond, and that was an outstanding interview. Every time he's here, I always love to hear from him. And for individuals not familiar with him, he's kind of the leading barrister in the UK, and he's kind of a Kelly Shackelford, Alan Sears, kind of person all rolled into one. But he has been warning us, Penna, many times, this is not the first time he's been on the program, that what he has seen in the UK is coming to the United States. And this anti-Semitism was appalling. I guess I knew it was there, but I had a fresh appreciation for how significant that was in Europe and what is perhaps coming to the United States.
Well, yeah, I hope not. In one sense, he was actually pleasantly surprised at the media here, which a lot of us are very critical of the way Hamas beside Israel are portrayed and sort of the moral equivalence between them. But apparently it's much worse where he comes from.
Wow. Any comments from anybody?
Well, one thing that I've enjoyed seeing is how some in Hollywood you would not expect to come to the aid of Israel has come there. Howard Stern, Joan Rivers, Simon Cowell even gave $150,000 to the IDF. John Voight had his open letter to some of the other Hollywood.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, whenever we think we might be losing something, you see something like that and think, okay, America's still pretty good on this issue, even if our administration or leaders aren't. The whole of America is.
I don't know if you saw USA Today, but there was a full-page ad, and it was put together by This World, and Elie Wiesel, who, of course, is a Nobel Prize peace winner, has a piece where it says, Jews rejected child sacrifice 3,500 years ago. Now it's Hamas's turn. And he tells the story, interesting enough, of both Ishmael and Isaac. And, of course, that was something that was very different than what he was talking about at that time. And he says, now in my own lifetime, I've seen Jewish children thrown into the fire, and now I've seen Muslim children used as human shields, in both cases by worshipers of death cults, indistinguishable from the, of course, ones in the Old Testament. And he says, we're now suffering today not a battle of Jew versus Arab or Israeli versus Palestinian. Rather, it's a battle between those who celebrate life and those who champion death. It is a battle of civilization versus barbarism. Do the two cultures that brought the Psalms of David and the rich libraries of the Ottoman Empire not share a love of life, of transmitting wisdom and opportunity to their children? And is any of this discernible in the dark future offered by Hamas to Arab children to be suicide bombers or human shields for rockets? So here you have really taking the Old Testament and applying that, and again from a fairly outspoken Jewish leader who, on a lot of the issues, Penna, we talk about, probably wouldn't agree with us, but on this particular issue, again, people are coming to the defense of Israel and really calling for moderate voices in Islam to reject and to really push to the extreme and push out of the conversation Hamas and ISIS and some of these groups. That was encouraging.
Yeah, it was. And now there's apparently some sort of a ceasefire taking place. And of course, we do hear from the Israeli government that they feel like they've accomplished a good proportion of what their goal was in destroying those tunnels. That was a development this time that was very, very disturbing because, you know, they have the Iron Dome, they have bomb shelters. People have kind of learned to live with that, even though that's worth retaliating against in itself. But when you combine that with these tunnels that where terrorists can just pop up in your community, sometimes
dressed as Israeli officers or something.
Whatever. Yeah. That nothing is too crazy for them to do, and really, it's very it's something you just can't sit back and let that occur. I mean, any nation must defend itself with regard to that, and so when Israel does retaliate and perhaps goes to the source of where the rocket was sent from, because they can do that from surveillance, sometimes often, in fact, most of the time, it's in a civilian area.
You know, I just have mentioned in the past that we do have a trip to Israel in October. I know you're going to be going too on another one, and it's kind of encouraging now that we've cleared out those tunnels. Can you imagine what it would have been like for some of us around the table if we were there in the fall? That's a very good action. By the way, there's still some open spots, I think 1 or 2 that are still left if you'd like to join us. But it is shocking even to people who feared the worst from Hamas. They had no idea there were that many tunnels, right. No idea how much explosive were in some of those tunnels. And so it's just one more illustration. Let's take one more phone call. We'll get some more after the top of the hour, but we wanted to go to Ohio, WGGN, and Matthew. What do you want to share with our audience today?
Well, first of all, I got to say, go Bucks.
Yeah.
And how wonderful it is that what you're doing, Mr. Kerby. I'm 26 years old, and I have really tuned into this station. They just hear the truth. It is amazing what you guys are doing on the station.
Well, thank you.
But my question is, as I watch the news in this presidency, or the Obama administration, how is it that we help these other religions by, aiding them water and food and whatnot? But what are we doing for the Christianity in these other countries? I mean, they're being slaughtered, these tens and thousands of them, but we have done nothing.
Yeah, and Penn, I wanted to come to you because that was kind of what I was getting at before. We can kill off Christians in the Coptic Church in Egypt. We can run Christians out of Iraq and out of Syria now. Christians are fleeing from Mosul. Hardly hear anything. Boy, we have a small group that most of us have never heard of. We have trouble pronouncing the organization's name. Then we start dropping some bombs. There's a little bit of concern there.
Yeah, there is concern. It's amazing that it's not talked about more in our churches on Sunday. I can't believe that American Christians are not more aware of the persecution of their brothers and sisters around the world and how it's escalating today. I mean, really, Christians are the most persecuted group in the world. And we had David Curry from Open Doors on this week, and they can't even talk about some of the work that they are doing. But, there's, in a sense, they get very strong from the persecution. But I think there are many ways in which we could help them. And certainly, I guess American Christians are just so comfortable in their Christianity, and that's why we prefer not to consider it too often,
I guess. Hey, here's an action item. I always like to give you an action item. And for those of you that are pastors, maybe Sunday school leaders, lead a Bible fellowship, I would encourage you to go to our website. You could type in the name David Curry. You can find some of the information that Penna did the interview on Tuesday. You can type in the name Frank Wolf, and that's an interview we did about 2 weeks ago. By the way, really one of the best columns I've ever seen written on this issue of persecuted Christians. And that would give you some information that could be part of your sermon, part of your Bible study, or some kind of teaching, because after all, it is important for us to certainly uphold other Christians in prayer. And I think so often Dennis Prager saying that when he was a Jewish boy walking around and promoting the persecution of Jews in the Soviet Union, even at that time he wondered, where are the Christians talking about the persecution of Christians in the Soviet Union? And that to this day continues on. We need to support our brothers and sisters in Christ around the world. Let's take a break, and when we come back, we will continue taking some phone calls on what's happening overseas, but we have a lot happening here as well. We're going to talk about the issue of immigration and also Penna's commentary today on abortion. We've got a lot more to cover. We will do that right after these important messages.
Across the nation, this is Point of View. For materials offered during the broadcast, please write to Point of View, Post Office Box 30. That's Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Zip 75221. Or call our toll-free number 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries and is supported by your generous tax-deductible contributions.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour today, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. We've been talking about what has been happening in Iraq and Israel, but certainly a number of other issues we'll get into later in this program. We'll take some of the phone calls from the previous hour, but certainly want to talk about immigration. One of our articles here, amnesty by executive order. Is the president going to issue an amnesty order? That's a big question. And what about this humanitarian crisis at our border? And Penna Dexter's commentary today on the issue of abortion. We're going to certainly talk about that and one of the rulings out of Mississippi. So we have lots to cover, but let's, in the interest of some of the comments we made in the first hour, go back to the phones. If you're just joining us, we have around the round table today Penna Dexter, Michael Berry, and Matt Krause. Just great to have all three of you here today, and we'll go first of all to the state of Georgia. Hank, thank you for calling today. Hank, are you there?
Yeah, I'm in an area.
Well, maybe I'll put you on hold for just a minute and make sure we get you set up there, and we will go to Kathy, KJBS in Texas. Kathy, thank you for calling today.
Thank you. Appreciate you taking my call.
Yeah, what would you like to share with us today?
My feeling towards the Christians in America not supporting the Christians around the rest of the world, and the fact that in 2008, Obama made a trip over to the Arab states, bowed to one of the Arab potentates who asked him, is America a Christian nation? And his comment was, no, America is not a Christian nation. Why do you think that they asked that question in the first place? If they said they are not a Christian nation, then obviously America is not going to come to the rescue of the Christians who are being persecuted by the Arab states.
Yeah. Well, we've got to be concerned. Some of the policies, Penna, we've talked about on this program before, and I don't even have a great answer for all of that other than the fact that we as the church certainly should support other Christians, even if the country sometimes isn't as supportive of the persecuted Christians around the world.
Well, we're coming to the rescue of a religious minority in northern Iraq right now that isn't Christian. So it's not necessarily that we would only come to the rescue of Christians, and certainly we can't come to the rescue of everyone that's facing problems around the world. But sometimes you have to decide, especially when you were complicit and more than complicit, when you basically caused the problem that's taking place. I think you have some sort of a responsibility.
I think so. Let me take another phone call real quickly here, and then we'll get on to some other topics. And that is our niece in Georgia, WAGP. I think you wanted to talk about Hamas. Go ahead.
I did. I was greatly distressed over reading that President Jimmy Carter was alarmingly favoring Hamas in his comments about the conflict that they have right now. He is very, very well versed in Scripture, and I just can't imagine that he would be favoring another terrorist group over the Israelis. He knows Scripture. He knows that we're supposed to pray for Jerusalem and that we're supposed to pray for Israel. It just blows my mind.
Well, let me talk about Hamas for just a minute. We are going to do a program next week in which some people that have actually been watching the broadcast, and there are people actually sitting down watching television every single day and counting how Hamas is portrayed, Penna, this wouldn't surprise you because we've had groups that have talked about this before. They talk about them as being militants or various invaders or defenders, but they don't use the word terrorist. Hamas is listed as a terrorist organization. I've got in front of me here something Jim Dennison has done for us before, 4 crucial questions about Hamas. But the article we just posted today, Hamas Human Shields Manual, when the Israelis went into Gaza, they actually found one of the manuals that actually shows that Hamas intentionally puts, not that this surprises anybody, children as human shields, intentionally tries to make sure that they set up rockets so that they can launch them, put those in dense areas so that it will increase the opportunity for more civilian casualties. And the manual even acknowledges that Israel goes out of its way to try to prevent collateral damage. And so it is instructing them on how to increase collateral damage. And this is not a group that you want to refer to as the Chamber of Commerce, right?
Gary Bauer pointed out something else, too, and that is that, why is the media so one-sided on this? And part of it is because if they actually go in and try to take pictures, they'll be shot.
Yes.
Hamas will shoot them if they see them trying to take a picture of what's really going on, so they don't.
Yes, and we showed the other day, and I think people can see this, of this one particular group. It was from India, and they were shooting out the window, and they saw someone setting up a tarp, and because the people that were doing it, obviously Hamas individuals, did not know they were being photographed, you could see them making the bomb under a tarp so that the satellites couldn't see what they were doing. And the reason they didn't get shot is because they're on the 3rd floor looking down and they were unaware of the fact that they were being observed. So we do have examples of them doing this intentionally, but as you point out, we don't have a lot of pictures of that because if you take a picture of Hamas constructing a bomb or setting up a rocket launching facility near a high-density area, they're going to be shooting at you.
Yeah, there was a quote that I saw, and I believe it was attributed to Netanyahu, although I can't be certain. And I thought it was interesting and telling. He said that Israel uses missiles to protect their civilians, whereas Hamas is using civilians to protect their missiles.
Yeah.
And that, to me, that kind of sums up the situation right now.
And when people have this moral equivalence, Matt, let me come to you for just a minute. This idea that, well, Israelis on one side, Hamas on the other side. And of course, right now, the United Nations is meeting to once again condemn Israel for its overreaction. I don't know, but if people in Oklahoma started launching rockets into Texas, not that would ever happen, or people in Mexico, as right now on our border, and that gets us into our next topic, began to shooting across the border. We just had another border agent killed by the drug cartel. I think we would feel that we were within our rights to respond immediately. We wouldn't wait for 1,000 rockets to land in Texas before we'd finally react to that.
Right. I mean, a nation has the right for self-preservation, right? And so, I mean, we see it time and time again. Israel tried. I've heard it said before that if Israel if Israel would quit shooting at people, there would be no more Israel. Whereas if the other side quit shooting, there would be peace. So yeah. Israel never instigates it. They always try to do it in a limited, very focused and narrow way to alleviate the problem, but they never start it. And so, like what you said, even the international community wants Hamas to be given the Iron Dome technology that Israel has. Every time Israel is doing something, they're always at fault. It just makes no sense, even when they try to retaliate to preserve their very existence.
Well, let's come back. I've sort of set up the idea of immigration. I see one of our callers wants to say, let's stop worrying about what's happening overseas. We have our own problems at home. Yes, we do. And one of those is the issue of immigration and what is happening at the border. This latest report from the Department of Justice, nearly half of all federal crimes take place near the Mexican border. That one is kind of interesting. The piece we've posted today by Charles Kruthammer about, is this president really going to actually grant through executive order amnesty? Even people like Jonathan Turley, who is a professor at George Washington University Law School, is saying that would be a disaster. And then what about all these kids that are here? Are they all just going to enroll in school? And I'd love to hear from a Texas legislator. Are we going to just all of a sudden open up these? And usually when you enroll your kids in school, they have to have certain immunizations. They have to have certain background checks. So we're just going to let them into the schools. We have some big issues to address. So we're certainly going to do that. And we'll do that right after these important messages.
The Point of View Commentary with Kerby Anderson.
A British author writing in The Banner of Truth began with this hypothetical scenario. An elder preceded the minister to the pulpit, then came to the front and addressed the congregation. Last week, a child was bored in the service. A gasp went through the congregation. Men looked at their feet. Women cried quietly, and children went white. He then suggests in this hypothetical scenario that the church officers were going to meet with the pastor and resolve the problem. I found it interesting that the author thought that it was a significant problem in British churches. It is certainly a problem in American churches. One of the greatest sins a church can commit today is to bore children. Church services and youth programs are designed to be high energy and to keep the attention of not just children, but adults. It is understandable why pastors work so hard to make sure that their services and youth programs are boredom-free zones. Churches have to compete with a generation raised on television, video games, computers, and smartphones. They live in a world of noise and excitement. They have short attention spans. What a contrast to adults who lived in the pre-digital age. They read books. They played games they made up themselves. They pursued various activities and hobbies. They didn't expect their parents or pastors to entertain them. I wonder if we wouldn't do these children a favor by once again introducing them to a simpler life. Instead of youth programs playing loud music and showing videos, why not provide quiet reflection and solid biblical instruction? If we really wanted to prepare children for the future, we better prepare them for sometimes being bored. When they get a job, they must be prepared to do some boring tasks. Future fathers and mothers certainly should be prepared to do lots of boring, repetitive chores. Life isn't always fun and exciting. If children or adults are bored in church, the problem may not be with the worship or the sermon. There is value in learning to be still and to hear from God. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Been talking about a lot of the I's. We've talked about Iraq, and we've talked about ISIS, and we've talked about Israel. We're going to talk about immigration now for just a few minutes, and we are privileged to have around the round table Penna Dexter, Michael Berry, and Representative Matt Krause. And Matt, I'd love to get your comments initially, because as a Texas state representative, you probably are paying attention even more so than the average state legislator, because it's happening at our border. And during that period of time in which these young people are coming across the border, unaccompanied illegal alien minors, a lot of them are coming through the McAllen corridor. And so this humanitarian crisis is now manifesting itself in students that in the next couple of days, not only in Texas, but around the country where they've been distributed, could show up in our schools.
That's right. It's a really tough situation. We've gotten so many calls into the district office with people legitimately worried and concerned about what's going to happen, especially once you hear Ebola and other places. You know, you never, I mean, that just kind of adds to it, whether there's any nexus to that or not. But so it's really a tough issue because, first of all, you got to think about how bad the situation is in Central America for mothers to send their 5, 6, and 7-year-olds on a death train just to try to give them a better life. So I think we have to remember that humanitarian side. But we also have to remember a nation without borders is not really a nation at all. And right now we don't have borders. And so we've got to get back to enforcing the rule of law, make sure our borders are secured. As painful as it is to have to send those children back to war-torn or violence-ridden areas, I think Chicago in the first 2 weeks of July had 26 shootings and 120 wounded in gunfighting. So we've got violence here in the United States as well. So that's nothing new. So I think we have to enforce our borders. We have to make sure that only those people people who are getting here legally can stay here, and then we have to send those children back to wherever it's from. But it starts with securing that border first.
Ben, let me come to you for just a minute. You're a mom, and you know when you register your kids to go to school for the first time, they want to know what your immunizations are. They want to know what their background is. You have to sign all sorts of forms. You sign your life away. We don't even know the historical background, much less the medical background, of some of these kids will show up on the front doorsteps of these public schools all over the country.
It will really change things in these communities. And I saw a piece on the Heritage Foundation's website this week. It was actually written by Governor Mary Phelan of Oklahoma.
Right.
And she says, well, it's a governor's dilemma. Illegal immigrants divert resources from the state's own citizens. And, you know, a lot of these states have their own issues and problems with poverty. And so this massive influx of people who are in poverty, who are going to need all sorts of resources and things set up, we have compassionate hearts, but our compassion cannot do all things for all people. And the first responsibility is to your own citizens. And so she just kind of went through it a little step by step on how it would affect the children of Oklahoma. I mean, it's a real tough situation, but I think the Obama administration has invited it. And you posted Charles Krauthammer's piece today about the fact that he may, and we are hearing rumors that he's going to issue some sort of an executive order that's going to it's going to legalize some people, or at least get them in this country legally, and we're going to have to begin paying for all services for them. And it's going to make a lot of people mad, and it may be actually a strategy of the left to draw impeachment of the president. It's going to be that bad. But that, because impeachment's never good for the party that's doing the impeaching. And so it's a desperate sort of attempt to influence the 2014 elections.
Michael?
Yeah, and this notion of amnesty, I can tell you as the son of someone who immigrated to this country legally back in the 70s, that those who have come to this country through legal means and the legal process and have gone through the wait to become U.S. citizens through lawful means and through the rule of law, it upsets them perhaps more than anyone else, and rightfully so, that they had to wait in line or they had to go through the proper procedures to become U.S. citizens, and something that they take. My mother will say that one of the proudest days of her life was the day that she became an official U.S. citizen, and it took her years to get to that point.
That's true.
And now to have this accomplished simply through executive fiat, it basically is a slap in the face to those who did take the hard route, so to speak, to become U.S. citizens.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of us like to go to the movies. I might go to the movies this weekend, and if you're standing in line to pay a ticket and somebody jumps in front of you, you get a little bit upset. But that's one thing when they actually make you wait another few minutes to get your ticket. What about individuals, as you pointed out, that have waited years and years, gone through the process of assimilation, guaranteed that they were not going to be a burden on the state, learned the history, took a citizenship test, and eventually held up their hands and swore allegiance to the United States of America? Then we allow people to jump in line. We are talking about approximately now 65,000 just illegal immigrant children, not to mention probably 100 to 150,000 others that have come in just because they have the belief, in light of some of the comments by the president, that they could maybe win the golden ticket, which is American citizenship. And I can see why a lot of immigrants are very upset about that.
That's right. And as my own mother would say, too, I mean, and it's not just the becoming a U.S. citizen, it's also the attendant responsibilities that come with that. The right to vote and to exercise that responsibility, to pay taxes, to become responsible members of a civic society, all the things that come with being a U.S. citizen that many of us may take for granted. For those who have waited years and struggled to become U.S. citizens through the immigration process, they'll be the first to tell you those are not things that should be taken for granted.
Matt?
Yeah, and as I heard it said the other day, we should make it 1,000 times more difficult to enter the country illegally, and we ought to make it 1,000 times easier to enter the country legally. And right now, we're penalizing all those who seek to come in the right way. And so I really hope the president doesn't take this unconstitutional step to grant amnesty. And if he needs any pointers on how unconstitutional that would be, I think we ought to remind him of some words that a man I know he esteems very highly himself said just a while back. He said, I swore an oath to uphold the laws on the books. Now I know some people may want me to bypass Congress and change the immigration laws of my own. That's not how our Constitution is written.
That's what
and he
said
said that a couple of times. He himself has reiterated the fact he can't do it on his own. So if he does this now, it's a complete endorsement that he's doing something unconstitutional.
By the way, if you want that quote, it's in that article by Charles Kruthammer, and I would encourage some of you to post that. Again, we post various videos, and you can hit the share button and put it on there. You could take this article and post it, or some of those quotes, and put it on your Facebook page, your blog. Use it as a letter to the editor. Use it as a letter to your member of Congress. Right now they're in recess, so theoretically they're going to have some of these town hall meetings, although I know some of them are hiding out right now because they don't want to hear from the American people. But those are some facts and figures you could use to really educate some of the people around you.
Matt, what about, I know that immigration is a national responsibility, and the borders are, but since it's not actually being fulfilled properly by our federal government. We heard about Mary Fallon of Oklahoma, but Texas is a border state.
Right.
What about us? I mean, our governor has sent the National Guard there. I mean, is that making a difference? What's going on down there? What are you hearing?
Yeah, it is making a difference, and that's one of the things that makes this so tough is that, you know, border security, immigration is supposed to be the complete province of the federal government, but when they're so derelict in their duty, I think Texas has a right and a responsibility to protect its own citizens. And so, as you said, the governor has called down the National Guard. We had a surge in DPS troops a couple of weeks before that, and we have found that in certain points of entry, the detainments have gone down, which means not as many people are trying to cross in those areas. So where we put extra boots on the ground, we put extra resources, we are seeing a lessening of the sieve that was before on the border. And so there's only so much we can do, but we're trying to do it to the best of our ability as state elected officials, because as you said, even though it's the federal government's responsibility, it's Texans who are being impacted on a daily basis, and we need to do all we can to help them out.
Let me put another issue on the table before we take a break, and that is deportation. One article, will illegal immigrant kids stay or be sent home? It depends on if they have a lawyer. Those that have lawyered up might stay a little bit longer, but it also gets back to some legislation, and that is Representative Matt Salmon from Arizona. We tried to get him on the program, and we will in the future, has actually said, this is real simple. We don't need a very complex piece of legislation. We just simply need to take this one particular law that was really intended to address the issue of human trafficking and saying that children that came from non-contiguous countries, that is, other than Mexico, those that come from, for example, Honduras, Guatemala, El Salvador, and maybe even all the way down to Colombia, that those are individuals that should go through a very lengthy deportation hearing. I think we can clear that up legislatively, but also it seems like right now we don't have the right due process, because if you have a lawyer, you have a more likelihood of staying here. If you don't, maybe we'll start deporting. Although, Matt, I haven't seen a lot of deportations lately. Have you?
No, they're giving them notice, hey, show back up to court in a couple of weeks, but lo and behold, they're not showing up. And so we're actually losing track of them. So, yeah, I don't think we're deporting them whether or not they have an attorney. Let's take a break, and I would love to get some of your comments about immigration. What should we do, and what are the options that we have? And are you concerned at all about the fact that we have at least 65,000 illegal immigrant children? We don't, in some cases, know their background. We don't know their medical history, and they're going to be in school with your children and grandchildren. So that's one issue on the table. What about deportation? And then a little bit later, we're going to focus on a very good piece that Penna Dexter each week writes a commentary, and this one on the dangerous abortion ruling. We'll talk about what that means as well. So much more to cover. And if you find yourself wanting some information on the topics we've addressed today, the list of articles as well as the web links are all available at our website, pointofview.net. If you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. We'll continue with our roundtable guests right after this.
You are listening to Point of View. For materials offered during the program, please write to Point of View, Post Office Box 30. That's Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, zip 75221. Or call our toll-free number, 1-800-347-5151. That's 1-800-347-5151. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour, if you'd like to join us, weekend edition, 1-800-351-1212. Penna Dexter, Michael Berry, Matt Krause. Just great to have all of our guests in studio today, but we also love to hear from you. Let's go to the state of California first. Tom, thank you for calling today.
Hi, hello. I just wanted to make a statement regarding this whole immigration deportation. I was listening to you guys, started listening to you today, by the way.
Well, thank you for listening.
I came here illegally, Canadian citizen, came across the border because, United States, the land of dreams, right? And it took a 3-year process, going back and forth with background checks, biometrics, and all that stuff. And, you pay your fees, you do your tests, you do your questionnaires. And the day I got my green card is the day I got a job. I just don't think it's fair how somebody like me who wants to do it on the right path gets punished by, these illegal immigrants who you're saying now might a chance of getting amnesty would cost the economy so much more money, which will probably make us pay a lot more in taxes, correct?
Sure. I mean, you were talking about language, border, and culture, but you're also talking about economic issues, and you're talking about fairness and justice issues. There are a lot of things associated with that. Go ahead.
Yeah, you're right. And like me, for example, I mean, I'm originally born in Poland, came to Canada, lived there for 20 years, right, until my parents migrated there. And, I had to learn the English language. That's another huge thing here.
That's
and like me, me being in California, I mean, I don't mean anything against those people who are trying to learn it, but I just don't think it's right having me forcefully having to learn Spanish because I got to communicate with somebody. You know what I mean? Sure. I just think that if they're coming to this country, they should learn what we go by. You know what I mean? And just like I did.
Sure. Michael, he's in a sense saying what you were just saying a few minutes ago, and that is, if indeed, as you used the example of your mother, learning what it takes to be an American, learning English if necessary, if that is not your first or second language, understanding our culture, and then swearing allegiance to the United States and assimilating, that's the process that we have. And now we have almost as many, and it's getting pretty close, as many people coming here illegally every year as we have people coming here legally every year.
That's right. And what it does is it discourages that legal process. And,
Yes.
and those are the people often, just like the caller there, just like Tom, that want to come here and contribute in a meaningful and valuable way to our society. They're willing to pay their taxes. They're willing to be productive members of the American society. But now they're being discouraged from doing so because they look around and they see that, oh, well, what I've done is now meaningless, and there's no reason for me to attempt to do that, or for my children to attempt to do that, or grandchildren, so on and so forth.
Sure. Tom, appreciate you calling, and certainly hope you'll be listening to the program more often, because we certainly cover these issues every single day, and these are some topics around our roundtable. Penna, any comments you have?
Well, we were talking during the break about, it's sad that parents send their children here, and the reasons, there must be some horrendous reasons why they're sending their kids, but also I think we're a magnet in some of the messages that we send. And one of the messages that President Obama sent by an announcement he made, I think it was about a year ago, that, if kids came, then there would be this, and I forget the initials that go with the order, but that there would be this draw. If you
DACA.
came here through no decision of your own as a young person, then you could stay, you could get an education and all of that. And so there's this sense of attraction, the incentive to come. And so I'm wondering which of it is. Is it so bad there that we should be getting down there and helping those people? Or is it more that we're actually issuing statements to draw these people in?
You were asking about that. It's called DACA, which is the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. And this is where I think some people are not being honest. There was a good piece the other day in the USA Today, and Kirsten Powers is convinced that we should not deport any of these kids. And her argument is that most of them are coming here because of the violence in their communities. And when asked, that's what they sometimes say, but sometimes they say to come here, have a better life. But it wasn't that they actually even know what DACA is. Well, the reality is we've actually played the video before where Senator Ted Cruz was interacting with the current Secretary of Homeland Security, and in his graph shows that once the DACA particular initiative came about, and that was saying that those dreamers, the students that were here to no fault of their own, might get amnesty, you see a massive uptick in the number of children who are coming here. We've always had violence in the Central America region. We've always had poverty in the Central American region, and we've always had some children coming here. But you cannot explain the rapid increase in the number that have come without understanding that those policies that were announced in Washington, and then the, I think, intentional miscommunication that came with some of the coyotes and traffickers down there, all of a sudden you have parents sending their kids here, hoping that their kids will get the green card, ultimately the gold ticket, if you will, of citizenship and be able to bring their parents here. And so policies out of Washington have an impact.
That's right. I read a Jonah Goldberg article a couple of weeks ago from National Review, and he had headlines from like 7 or 8 different papers talking about the violence in Central America. And then he said, oh, yeah, by the way, all those ran from 1991 to 2005. So this isn't anything new. There's always been violence over there. I think y'all are exactly right. It's the administration, the policies, and what they're putting out there that's drawing everybody in the influx in right now.
Let's see if we can get just a few more phone calls here. We'll go to South Carolina. Mark, what are your comments?
Mr. Henderson, you're awfully kind to say that Washington's actions have some impact on this. It's completely engineered by Washington to create Democrat voters. If you notice, most of these illegal aliens, not immigrants, illegal aliens, are being placed by the federal government in what's now referred to as red states.
Sure. We're having a little trouble hearing you, but I think his argument, so that some people can't hear because we didn't have a very good phone connection, is this was intentional, and that is to bring individuals that eventually could be Democratic voters into the red states. And, you know, you've had people like Louis Gohmert say that. He's been in the studio with us. You've had people like Steve Stockman and Steve King who said maybe it's even the Cloward-Piven strategy, the idea of really trying to overwhelm the system. I don't think these children are going to vote anytime soon, but still all the other Hispanics being allowed in are maybe one of the reasons why, Penna, that I felt that Democrats have not been that interested in controlling the borders. If they were convinced that those people crossing our borders were going to be future Republican voters, I think we would probably have a little bit more attention to this issue than we've had right now from the Democratic Party.
We need to have a chart seeing what states these kids are being sent to. I mean, I'm hearing Kansas. Yeah. I'm hearing Oklahoma, South Carolina. He's right. They are red states.
Yeah. So it certainly could be that. Let's take at least one more phone call, and then we'll get into some other topics. But we'll go back to the state of California. And Albert, thank you for calling today.
Oh, hi. Yes, this is Alberto.
Oh, Alberto, thank you so much. I'd love to get your thoughts. I understand that you have a Hispanic background, and tell us what you're thinking about this issue.
Absolutely. I have I'm a new immigrant also. I'm an American citizen. I chose to be an American citizen, so I'm proud. I'm not an American by accident. I'm not an American because I was born by accident in this land. I chose to be an American. So I love this country. I love the red and white colors. But this is the news. Nothing. There's no human power that's going to stop people crossing the border. No matter what the government put in the line and the border, nothing will stop them. Why? Because when there's a need, it's a third world country. Over there, Mexico, South Central America is a disaster. The economy, the government. So what we see when we live in those countries, we see America as a salvation for us. So when there's a human need, there's nothing in this world that will stop the people to cross. Now, what has to be done, in my personal opinion, is to set up a system, legislation in Washington, rules and regulations, maybe to open a new program, not an amnesty maybe, but maybe like the Bracero program. People that can come, work, with policies, they learn English, they work, and they go back to their land.
Sure. And again, we're coming close to a break, but there are certainly some needs that are there. But one of those is you certainly have to figure out some way to control the border. There are more things we can do. And of course, if we start deporting some of these kids back, the first time one of those buses arrives, a lot of the parents are going to say, well, maybe I don't need to send my kids because it's going to be futile. But I do believe that we do need to address that second issue, but as I've said before, if you have a leak in your home, what's the first thing you do? You turn off the water, then you try to mop it up. I think we're going to be futile if we try to mop it up before we turn off the water, but that's another issue that we certainly can address. But as we go to a break, those of you listening online, you will be able to hear once again the commentary that we play each Friday by Penna Dexter, and when we come back, we'll talk a little bit about her commentary on abortion. That's another issue you need to know about, but we'll talk about that with her and you right after this.
In the wake of the 1973 Roe v. Wade Supreme Court decision, the pro-abortion movement launched a brilliant PR strategy, complete with an official description, pro-choice. Now, apparently, the term pro-choice has run its course. Planned Parenthood officials say they'd prefer the words women's health or economic security to describe the organization's mission. This coming from a group that derives more than half of its clinic income from abortions. Why the change? Cecile Richards, Planned Parenthood's president, told the New York Times, "I just think the pro-choice language doesn't really resonate particularly with a lot of young women voters." She's right. Surveys show young women are increasingly pro-life. We can now see into the womb, and guess what? That's a real baby in there that will die if the mother chooses abortion. Better, says Planned Parenthood, to talk about choosing health. But abortion isn't healthy. It's always lethal for the baby and can be dangerous to the mother. That's why so many states are passing laws requiring that abortion providers have admitting privileges at a local hospital in case of complications, which happen all the time during and after abortions. Texas passed such a law about a year ago, and the number of abortion clinics has dropped precipitously. Planned Parenthood, of course, always challenges these laws in court. Recently, a panel for the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals ruled that these regulations are perfectly constitutional in Texas. Mississippi falls under the same jurisdiction, yet the Fifth Circuit more recently struck down Mississippi's law, which regulates clinics just the way Texas's law does. The reasoning? The law would result in the closing of the last remaining abortion clinic in Mississippi. Mississippi would be the first abortion-free state in the nation, and that's somehow unconstitutional. The panel said it imposes a burden on a woman seeking abortion not to have an abortion clinic in her state. Yet 60% of Mississippi women obtaining abortions travel to another state for the procedure. If this decision stands, substandard clinics could be left open. Michael New pointed out in his recent National Review article on this decision that the owner of Mississippi's lone abortion clinic, Diane Durzis, was also the owner of the all-woman, New Woman abortion clinic in Birmingham, Alabama. That clinic was deemed unsafe and the state shut it down. Dr. New concluded it would be unfortunate if Mississippi's Department of Health would be unable to completely enforce various health and safety rules because of this ruling. The abortion rights crowd wants to be thought of as protecting women's health, but it's fighting laws that do just that. The decision by the fairly conservative Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals panel could result in a brand new right to have a functioning abortion clinic in your state. At a time when the public is becoming more pro-life, we should not be creating more rights to kill. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. We might not have time for too many more phone calls, but we are privileged to have in studio today Penna Dexter and certainly Michael Berry and Matt Krause. And Penna, let me come to you for just a minute. Anybody that has listened to this online will have just heard your commentary. We always make your commentary available to anyone to simply go to the Point of View blog, and that one today is already posted, and it is talking about the fact that we have a dangerous abortion ruling. Explain what's going on there in the state of Mississippi.
Well, it kind of has its origins in the state of Texas, and maybe in a minute we can let Matt tell us a little bit about that battle, but there was a big battle here. And we passed a law here in Texas that restricts abortion clinics in certain ways. One of those ways is requiring that the abortionists have admitting privileges to a local hospital. That law was challenged, of course, by Planned Parenthood. It went up to the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals where it was upheld. And not long later, Mississippi passed the same type of law, really the same language. And that law went up to the same Circuit Court of Appeals, the Fifth Circuit, but it got a different ruling. It was overturned. And the reason given was because in Mississippi, they only had like 1 or 2 abortion clinics, and both of them would have been closed by passing this law, if this law had remained in effect. And so it was almost like creating a new right, a right to have an abortion clinic in your state. So that's sort of a dangerous ruling. That's why I called it a dangerous abortion ruling. And so now, this week, Alabama's law that was just the same, pretty much the same as the Texas and the Mississippi law, was also overturned. So it's a big battle for these laws, and they're very protective of women. When you think about it, shouldn't the doctor that does the abortion on you on the woman be required to have admitting privileges to a hospital in case there's a complication, which there are very often. Matt, you were involved in the battle for that law in Texas, weren't you?
That's right. And one of the incredible things was when the Texas law was initially challenged, it was overruled as well at the district court level by a man. That decision was overruled by 3 women at the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. So if you're going to say this is a war on women, you would think 3 women justices would know when that's going to happen. But yeah, we saw the best and the worst of people during that House Bill 2 debate last year, and it was incredible to be able to witness all that. I remember coming out of the House chamber after we voted for life and just having countless protesters yell, "Shame on you, shame on you." All I could think is, I hope my Heavenly Father's saying, "Well done, thou good and faithful servant," So, but it was incredible to see. And you would think if you truly are pro-woman and looking out for the interests of the woman, you'd want to make sure that the procedure's done well, that it's done in a sanitary location, that they have all the proper tools and procedures in place. Because as one of my colleagues pointed out, abortion is the only medical procedure where if done properly, someone loses a life. And there's so many things that can go wrong with that for the woman and the unborn child. And it just seems incredible to me that these women's groups would argue against having these safe sanitary places and standards in place to have these procedures done.
Wow. You mentioned in passing, we should talk about that again, the controversy in the state of Texas. Now, a while back, I had Governor Scott Walker on here, and many of our listeners would be familiar with the fact that when he was trying to pass legislation, there were people coming from outside the state and all sorts of radicals trying to take over the state capitol, and got pretty ugly. Well, that was a kind of a preview of coming attractions on what happened in Texas. And we've talked about the fact that you're in the Texas House, but in the Texas Senate in particular, you had one individual who's now running for the governorship, Wendy Davis, and she wanted to filibuster your law. She is free to do that. But what happened is it kind of came unglued pretty quickly because she began to encourage people in the gallery to react. And it, in terms of threats, in terms of things they wanted to throw into the legislature, I mean, physical and things I really can't describe, but you can imagine every bodily fluid was going to end up on the floor there before it was all through. And, Matt, I'm a little concerned because the next time you guys meet for the legislature, if you get on to another contentious issue and the radicals do in Austin what they were doing in Madison, Wisconsin, and what we've seen happening in other states, I'm a little concerned about the legislative process. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, at the end of that filibuster, there was no legislative process. It was chaos. It was anarchy. Yes. And so, but hopefully we've learned from that. The second go around after the filibuster, when Governor Perry called us back into special session the very next day, which I was very glad he did that, things ran not completely smooth, but much more smooth the next time. So there's processes and procedures we can put into place to make sure that doesn't happen again. And it was good to see us come back from that anarchy and chaos to a very well-reasoned, well-done legislative process that will save thousands of lives.
Penna, what about this idea? Because you do have some states, I think South Dakota, for example, does not have an abortion clinic, or at least an abortion doctor within the state. But now you have this idea that, well, we can't implement this particular piece of legislation because then we would have no abortion clinic in the entire state of Mississippi. And I'm saying, and what's wrong with that?
Well, right now, most 60% of the women getting abortions in Mississippi drive to another state to get it. Yeah. And so, I don't know, it just concerned me. It sort of struck a chord to say that you would actually, that Roe versus Wade, the 1973 decision allowing abortion, would mean that for somehow that it would be interpreted to mean that every state should have an abortion clinic, that women deserve that, or that's, part of protecting the woman's, not placing an undue burden on the woman's right to abortion, I guess is the wording they used. And that, I did talk to a couple of attorneys on the air about it this week, and no one seemed to be terribly concerned that that's how it would end up. But just to hear that reasoning from that judge was a little scary to me. I don't know what will happen next with this, because it's sort of interesting. The same circuit court ruled differently on the same type of law. So I'm sure that there's going to be some appeals going on.
Wow. Michael?
Yeah, I don't mean to be, I'm not trying to be flippant about a subject as somber as abortion, but what strikes me as odd is that, one of the catchphrases or slogans that the pro-abortion crowd has used is, our goal is to make abortion safe and rare. And it strikes me that having a law that would require an abortion doctor to have admitting privileges to a hospital would accomplish one of those goals, which would be to make abortion, at least conceivably, more safe. And that if he's not admitted, then he's not allowed to perform abortions in that state, which would make the second half of their goal there. It would make it more rare. And yet, simply attempting to pass this law, which would make abortion safe and rare, at least more so than it currently is, they don't want any part of that. So to me, they're being disingenuous and perhaps intellectually dishonest with the public.
Let me just, before we finish off here, encourage people to go to your website. So I'm going to go around the roundtable, but give you a preview for next week because we're kind of excited about that. I mentioned that we are going to look at the way in which the media has covered things like Israel and Hamas. So we're going to have Matt Philbin in with us. Jim Sire, who is the editor of InterVarsity Press, wrote a very good book called Universe Next Door, has a new book out, and so we're going to be learning from him as well. Matt Kinnaman with Barna Group is going to be joining us for an hour, and of course I mentioned the one with John Stonestreet and Sean McDowell, their new book on the issue of homosexuality. That's just a few of the individuals we'll be talking about next week, but let me come back to you, Michael, real quickly and talk about Liberty Institute. I think very highly of your organization. I've been a financial supporter for years. I've known Kelly longer than any of us want to admit. I remember when I first met his wife and she was pregnant. So, I mean, I've known him for a long time, and I think highly of what you do and all of your staff. If people want to know more about Liberty Institute, how can they connect up with you?
The easiest way would be to go onto our website, which is www.libertyinstitute.org. You can find out more about what we're doing across our nation to defend and restore religious liberty in our churches, our schools, the public arena, and, of course, throughout the military as well.
Matt, let me come to you as well. We have, obviously, a link to Matt Krause, but also Patriot Academy. And if some people out there say, I want to know a little bit more about some of these laws that you've passed, we've now talked about two different ones, one related to abortion, one related to religious liberty. They can contact you as well, can't they?
Yeah, absolutely. And first, if I could just echo what you said about Liberty Institute, they are a world-class organization. Michael, Kelly do incredible work. So I'd encourage you to if you find yourself in a constitutional crisis, call them because they can help you out. A lot of times they can help you, but they only can if they know what your situation is. But yeah, if you're interested in anything that we've done in the legislature, feel free to visit mattkrause.org. You can read all about what's going on in the legislature there. And then for any 16 to 25-year-olds or any older who know 16 to 25-year-olds, please look at patriotacademy.com so we can help train you to become the leaders of the next generation to ensure that this republic, this experiment lasts for many more years.
Penna, this has been a great program. And again, thank you for hosting the program earlier in the week.
Lots of fun. And what a great panel today. I enjoyed it.
I am looking forward to getting you guys back again. This has been great. Kelly, you can just be on vacation because we've got some really talented guys here, but we'll probably have him back in studio next week. Want to thank Andrew and Catherine and Chris for their help behind the scenes. Have a great weekend. We look forward to hearing you and joining you again on Monday here on Point of View. We'll see you then.
You have been listening to Point of View. For materials offered on the program, please write to Point of View, Post Office Box 30. That's Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Zip 75221. Or call our toll-free number 1-800-347-5151. That's 1-800-347-5151.
Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries and is supported by your generous tax-deductible contributions.